The good life. We all want it. The friends, success, making the most out of every moment. All that's great, but who decides what a good life looks like anyway? Beyond the noise of algorithms and influencers, what's gonna last? What if a truly good life is outside of a clapback cancel culture world and far better than the fake it till you make it society? What if we choose to trade the autopilot undercurrent of culture in order to look for something more?
Can we talk about something that doesn't get enough attention? I'm talking about the fact that there are cars out there that drive themselves. Is this not absolutely wild to anybody else? You're a teenager, which means that you were definitely alive before this was a reality. It also means that you've probably heard of one of the people who made it possible, Elon Musk. He led his team to build electric vehicles to save you the stress of cutting off people in traffic. The car will literally drive for you. I have never experienced a self-driving car. The thought of putting a car into self-driving mode and taking my hands off the wheel makes me just a little anxious. It's crazy that the car drives itself. If you've never been in a self-driving car, today's your lucky day, because everyone here gets a Tesla. No, just kidding. I'm not Oprah, but I do have YouTube, so check out what I'm talking about. Okay, but this is happening with more than just cars. Every year, more of life goes on autopilot. Everyday tasks and activities can be done for us automatically by AI, machines, or even robots. It sounds like science fiction, but you already know how real it is. Bakeries are being replaced by cupcake vending machines. Complicated banking is replaced by autopay, and grocery shopping, or really any shopping, has been replaced by Amazon, Dash Buttons, or Instacart. But what happens when we start living our entire life on autopilot? We go through the motions. We wake up, get to our classes, do our homework, make it through practice, hit the bed at night, and do it all over again the next day. Yes, there are moments of excitement along the way, like when we go to a concert or spend time with a friend or move up on the leaderboard of our favorite video game. But for the most part, we're just coasting. We're watching the world happen through the windshield of our life on autopilot. And if we do this, things can get dark pretty quickly. Living on autopilot can eventually cause us to feel down because, if we're honest, a lot is going on in the world that's not great. And when we're on autopilot, that can be all that we see. Bad news pops up as we scroll through our social media. People at school tend to talk about tough or controversial topics more than anything else, and drama gets most of the attention from our friends. It feels like we're constantly reminded of how bad life is for other people in broken situations. And soon, it begins to feel like that's all that there is. Others may not struggle with what I just described, but even though our outlook might be a little more positive, we still feel like we just go through the motions. Our routine, friend groups, the walls of our school, they just seem so blah. And it's not that it's all that awful, it's just that they're the same day in and day out. Life begins to feel repetitive and boring, and this kind of autopilot leaves us thinking something like, there's got to be more than life to this. So we know deep down that we were made for more. We crave a way to get the most out of life, but we're not really sure how to wake ourselves up and get it. Whether we struggle with this feeling all of the time or just in certain seasons of life, we all know what it's like to live on autopilot. And let's be honest, this is not the life that we really want. So what is the life we really want? Well, I did a bit of Googling and I found the answer to this question, at least according to music. From G-Eazy to Frank Sinatra, I looked up songs with the good life somewhere in them, and here's what they have to say about what the good life looks like. Fun, food, money, cars, big cities. But come on, let's be real here. This isn't what life looks like for most of us. It isn't really attainable. We all know plenty of people who've achieved this version of the good life, and they still seem miserable. They may be rich and famous, but they're living with that same sense of autopilot as the rest of us in a way. So if this is the best that's out there, then we must be looking for something different. Deep down, we're looking for a different kind of good life. So how in the world can we find it? Jesus, the man who claimed to be God in human form and lived a couple of thousand years ago, might have an idea. Jesus said a lot of things during his years of teaching, but there's one statement that speaks directly to what we're talking about today. His friend John thought it was so important that he included it in his biography of the life of Jesus, which we now call the book of John in the Bible. Jesus was in the middle of explaining who he was and how he would set all of humanity right with God when he said this: "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." John 10:10. Jesus says there is a way of life out there that only leads to hurt and pain and sadness. But I'm here to show you how to live the good life. I can show you how to get the most out of this life that you have. And that's a pretty bold statement. Jesus claimed to be the one who could truly show us how to find and live that good life. Years later, a guy named Paul, one of the most influential Christian leaders in history, explained a little more about what Jesus meant when he said this. In Paul's letter to Christians in Galatia, he lays out what it means to follow Jesus and experience all that he came to earth to make possible. Before he gets there, Paul tells us what comes naturally to us as human beings, kind of what life can start to look like lived on autopilot. And he writes this: "It's obvious what kind of life develops out of trying to get your own way all the time. Repetitive, loveless, cheap sex, a stinking accumulation of mental and emotional garbage, frenzied and joyless grabs for happiness, trinket gods, magic show religion, paranoid loneliness, cutthroat competition, all-consuming yet never satisfied wants, a brutal temper, and impotence to love or to be loved, divided homes and divided lives, small-minded and lopsided pursuits, the vicious habit of depersonalizing everyone into a rival, uncontrolled and uncontrollable addictions, ugly parodies of community." I could go on. Galatians 5:19 through 21. Clearly, subtlety was not Paul's strong suit. I don't know about you, but this is a list of things that I don't want anything to do with. Not to throw shade, but this doesn't sound like a good life at all. In fact, it sounds a lot like the kind of life we can easily fall into on autopilot. So, what's our alternative? What is the good life? Paul tells us in the next verse, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control." Galatians 5:22 through 23. That's more like it. These words characterize Jesus' life on earth. And in fact, when we see things in ourselves, in others, and in the world around us, we can be sure we are seeing God at work. And isn't that the life we really want? The stuff Paul writes about here, the stuff that Jesus demonstrated with his own life. This stuff sounds like the good life. Who doesn't want more love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control? We want more of these things in ourselves, in our relationships, and in our world as a whole because they lead to a good life. And the good news is that Paul is very clear about how we get them. He says that they are the fruit of the Spirit, meaning what naturally comes from the Spirit. The Spirit that Paul's talking about is the Holy Spirit, the power that Jesus promised to his followers. The Spirit is the very real presence and power of God. We often talk about God as Father and as Son, meaning Jesus, but the Holy Spirit is just as much God as the Father and the Son. The Spirit is who lives in us, giving us power and helping us to live a life full of the fruit that Paul mentions. Ultimately, the Holy Spirit is helping us to live life more like Jesus because those good things are what his life was full of. Now, that might sound strange, but spirituality is actually a big part of Christianity. There's more to being a Christian than just believing certain things and trying really hard to do what God says is best. Something supernatural is happening even when we can't see it. That's where the Holy Spirit comes in. Here's another way to think about this. In this series, we're talking about the fruit of the Spirit. They're basically the good things that are a result of staying connected to the Spirit of God. Just like an orange tree produces oranges, God produces characteristics in us when we stay close to him. And this is good news because that's a much better scenario than if it were up to us to produce the characteristics on our own. The orange tree grows oranges. The orange is the evidence that there's life inside of that tree. In the same way, when we partner with the Holy Spirit and live our lives in a way that shows the characteristics that Paul mentioned, it's proof that the Spirit is alive and working in us. And as Christians, the Holy Spirit lives in us at the core of who we are. He is the force inside of us, moving us toward a life that is more in line with what God is and what Jesus demonstrated in his own life. The Holy Spirit works to make us who we were always meant to be, taking autopilot lives and making them something bigger, fuller, something good. We'll unpack this more in the coming weeks, but for now, this is Paul's big idea about the way to live a really good life. Paul says that what's natural for you is not what's best. And then he says that we can get what we really want in our life through our supernatural helper, the Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit guides us to the good life. The Holy Spirit is a better guide through life than autopilot. He steers the way, and we partner with him to experience the good life that God had in mind for us. Let's talk about how to make this a reality. There are 2 steps that we can start taking this week. Number 1, turn off autopilot. It's easier to go through the motions and grind through your days, but it's not the best thing for you. Getting off of autopilot is all about self-awareness, and it's about paying attention. Where is your life really heading? Who's guiding you and leading you? In the way that you think, in the way that you act? If we'd say that first list looks more like our life, then chances are autopilot is moving us toward what's natural, going with the flow of life. Doing the things that Paul had on that first list is part of our sin nature. But it's a dead end. Instead, we can acknowledge today that where we're headed isn't where we want to go, and we want to start being honest about where we are now and getting off of autopilot. And then, number 2, you can choose another way. The good life starts when we choose to go a different way with the life that we have. God has given us a chance to choose, and we can easily stay on autopilot and head wherever culture and society takes us, or we can choose to turn that autopilot off and follow the Holy Spirit. Because of the Holy Spirit, we aren't doing things on our own, and that's good news. So if you're brand new to the idea of Christianity, start by asking somebody like a small group leader here at church what it means to begin following Jesus and experiencing the Holy Spirit as your guide. If you've been around us for a while, but you found yourself back on autopilot in life, then maybe it's time for you to choose to take this part of your faith seriously again, to begin not just believing, but living differently because of what you believe about Jesus. We can all be aware, turn off autopilot, and choose another way. In the coming weeks, we will talk more about what this other way looks like and how the Holy Spirit guides us to experience it. Just imagine living the life Paul described, a good life motivated by the Holy Spirit. Imagine if you found a way to turn off autopilot and get the most out of life. Imagine if there was a better way to do school. This could change everything. You would begin to see God creating more of all of the good things Paul mentioned in your life in very real ways. And you'd have a huge head start on people like me who can only wish that we would have taken this more seriously at your age. The good life is possible. So let's do it. It's time to live the good life.